Great. I'm Gwendolyn Du Bois Shaw, the inaugural faculty director of the Arthur Ross Gallery and the James and Nan Wagner Farquhar Professor of History of Art. I want to welcome you to the Arthur Ross Gallery Susan T. Marx Distinguished Lecture, a conversation between renowned artist Jesse Krimes and distinguished Penn Professor Andrew Lamas. Before I introduce our panelists, I would like to say a few words about Susan Marx, Women's College class of '66. Whose vision and generosity have made tonight's event possible, and the entire Susan T. Marx lecture series possible, 9 of them. We are so grateful to Susan. She is a proud alumna of Penn. She graduated with honors and went on to do a law degree at New York University. Early in her career, she worked with nonprofits such as the Legal Aid Society, Recording for the Blind, before founding St. Marx and Associates in 1980. A development consulting firm that has helped secure critical support for numerous health, social service, arts, and education organizations. In 2021, Susan made a landmark gift to the Arthur Ross Gallery to endow this lecture series in perpetuity, ensuring that Penn and the Philadelphia community, and now through Zoom, the entire world, would continue benefiting from dialogues at the intersection of art, scholarship, and public life. Her connection to the arts is deeply personal. As a student, she was inspired by courses held in Penn's Harrison Auditorium over at the museum, and she is also an avid sculptor and stone carver in her own practice, a prize-winning one. She also serves on the Arthur Ross Gallery's Alumni Advisory Board and sits on the Directors' Council of the Penn Museum, among her many commitments to our campus and cultural institutions. We owe a debt of gratitude to Susan for her foresight, her belief in art as a catalyst for inquiry, and her enduring investment in this institution and its audiences. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Lower everything here. Gwendolyn, thank you so much for those very, very kind remarks. So here we are again, the 9th annual lecture. Over the years, we have been privileged to sponsor a broad range of artists who travel to campus to share with us some insight into their work and who they are. Among our international artists is Jaume Plensa from Barcelona, and I just heard he's going to be on campus dedicating a piece at the museum in several weeks, so that's wonderful news. Shira Nashat, she was originally from Iran. Liliana Porter, originally from Argentina. Closer to home, we've enjoyed Janetta Cole, former director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art, the late David Driscoll, artist, teacher, and curator. And from Los Angeles, we have had Allison Sarr, a brilliant multimedia artist, and Elizabeth Turk, a MacArthur Genius Award winner. During the pandemic, when everything was virtual, the world-renowned William Kentridge spoke to us from his studio in Johannesburg, South Africa. So not bad. We've done pretty well here, and it's been an amazing choice of artists, and of course tonight's artist is no exception. I was going to talk about the origins of this lecture series, and Gwendolyn mentioned it, but I'm going to repeat it with your permission. As an undergraduate at Penn, I was able to take several history of art courses. These were very magical experiences and opened my eyes to a new world. Since that time, art has had a profound impact on my life, both art appreciation as well as its creation. And because of my undergraduate experience, my life's avocation has been as a sculptor in stone, for which I have received recognition. In giving back to the university, I had hoped to encourage students across a variety of disciplines to develop an interest in art by offering them the rare chance to hear directly from distinguished artists about their art, their process, and what inspires them. Today, we're especially thrilled to have a talented multimedia artist, local Pennsylvania resident, Jesse Krimes. Jesse has had exhibitions at major museums, including the works recently on display in his solo show at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. He's had an unconventional background framing both his art and his activities in social justice. He will share his creative process, which I know you will find fascinating. We look forward to hearing about the conception and execution of each of the pieces which garnered so much interest and admiration at the Met. And finally, I would like to thank Gwendolyn Du Bois Shaw, Emily Zimmerman, and Miranda Powell of the wonderful Arthur Ross Gallery for all their hard work in organizing this event. And now it's my pleasure to turn the program back over to Gwendolyn, who will introduce the distinguished artist, Jesse Krimes. A very, very warm welcome to you, Jesse.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you for all you do for Penn. I want to add, for those of you who are alums and who will be here for homecoming, that Susan's extraordinary contributions will be recognized in just 2 weeks at homecoming with the Creative Spirit Award at the Alumni Award of Merit Gala on Friday of homecoming weekend. So please come out for that if you'll be with us. Congratulations, Susan. Maybe if we hit escape out of it. We're just trying to get rid of that little message at the top of the screen. Can you, yeah? Thanks, Jules. Okay. So we are honored to present a conversation between Jesse Krimes, a visionary multimedia artist whose work probes the intersections of power, punishment, and redemption, and Andrew Lamas, a scholar whose lifelong commitment to critical pedagogy has examined urban inequality, alternative economies, and justice. During a 6-year sentence, Jesse Krimes produced a vast and often covert body of work, founded collective art practices behind bars, and went on to launch the Center for Art and Advocacy, the first national nonprofit dedicated to supporting justice-impacted creatives. He also successfully led a class action lawsuit against JPMorgan Chase for predatory fees imposed on the formerly incarcerated. His work is held in major collections, and he has been recognized with an Emmy Award for his documentary filmmaking and numerous prestigious fellowships. Professor Andy Lamas joined the Penn faculty in 1990, teaching across departments as diverse as urban studies, social policy, and gender, sexuality, and women's studies. His research tracks poverty, inequality, and the politics of alternative economies. And he has been a voice for radical education, social justice, and institutional critique. Tonight's dialogue, set within the richer context of this lecture series, invites us to reflect on how incarceration shapes, constrains, and inspires artistic expression, while also asking, what kind of justice does art demand? As these two speakers intersect lived experience, critical scholarship, and creative practice, we're privileged to sit in the space where theory, testimony, and imagination meet. And I just want to say, for those of you who haven't seen in the newspaper yet, that Penn rejected the compact. And I think that this program is a demonstration of why the university needs to maintain free speech, freedom of thought, and a welcome to all. So please join me in welcoming Jesse Krimes and Andy Lamas to the stage. And we're going to begin with a short presentation by Jesse, a slide from Andy, and then the lights will come up so you can see them after that. But we can't have like the slides and the lights. So we'll have to choose. Jesse?
Can you hear me?
Hold on 1 second. There you go.
All right, that's better. Thank you, Gwendolyn and Susan, for inviting me. It's an absolute honor to be here. I just wanted to kind of start by saying, before I kind of get into my practice and my work and my story, I just wanted to reiterate how important higher education is, because for most of my life, I had always kind of been on the outside of that. And I grew up very poor. And so pretty much since the age of 13, I've transitioned through nearly every facet of the criminal justice system, from juvenile probation and jail to state prison to federal prison. And for me, that was kind of indicative of how society treats the social crises that we see in this country. And so rather than see a young person who was struggling and needed help, I was met with police and punishment pretty much at every turn throughout the system and throughout my life. And I say that until I actually ended up going to college, and my professors saw value in me, which was the very first time that I've ever actually felt that from anyone outside of my immediate family. And that value and the way that they invested their time and energy into my thinking and my critical understanding and perspective and my art practice was absolutely transformative. And in many ways, it prepared me to go into the carceral system. And I mean that, we always say higher education is preparing people to enter out into the world. Penn is one of the leaders in that and produces some of the brightest leaders across the country, with the exception of maybe one that I can think of.
Or two or three.
Yeah, or two or three, but no one's perfect. But even still, like, that education was absolutely transformative for me. And that is the thing that sustained me going through the carceral system, which is literally designed to completely erase me from public view, destroy my identity. It is designed to oppress people and to make you believe that you are something other or something that can be disposed of. And instead of that, because I had this education, I had the strength to kind of persevere through this system and invest myself in something positive. So I just wanted to start with that because I believe that's important to just kind of ground. And so the first year, I was originally arrested for a very small amount of cocaine. And when I refused to cooperate and tell on other people, they increased my drug weights from 140 grams up to 50 kilos. And that effectively increased my sentencing guideline range from around a 30-month federal sentence to a mandatory minimum of 10 years to life. And additionally, they transferred me from the jail I was in to another facility and put me in solitary confinement. And so it was while I was in solitary confinement that I began asking myself some questions of how I'm going to get through the rest of this time, whether I get 10 years or 20 years, it doesn't matter. How do I sustain myself and utilize this time to create something positive out of this negative experience? And so I began working with the very limited materials that I had in solitary. And that was prison-issued soap, access to newspapers, prison bed sheets. That's pretty much all you have in there to work with. And again, having gone into this system and having read Foucault's Discipline and Punish, I was already quite versed in thinking about how the kind of genealogical development of the punitive systems have developed over time, from back in the day of when people would be forced to come out into the town square to witness a beheading, and how that was utilized as a way to exert power over the population. And I realized that today we no longer do that, at least in that direct way. Instead, today we take mugshots, which is a photographic medium that is designed to be weaponized specifically to control the population. And so these mugshots that would appear in the local newspaper were ways to basically do a mediated decapitation or hanging, and then send it into people's homes as a way to kind of exert this power and control, utilizing individuals from one point in time, usually around something that is often the worst mistake they've ever made, but like it starts to frame a narrative and stereotypes and societal value systems when these images are repeated over and over and over again that is not actually reflective of who the people are who are incarcerated. And so I began removing those from the textual narratives and transferring them onto the surface of the prison-issued soap. And that was a way to kind of decontextualize how we see someone as an offender. And I also began incorporating images of politicians and celebrities, again, as a way to kind of complicate this notion of who we're viewing as an offender. And so over the period of a year, I was producing this work and I needed to find a way to get it out of the prison. And so I began collecting prison playing cards and cutting the faces of the kings, jacks, and queens off with the interior of a AAA battery. Oh. And this was how I kind of concealed and protected the soaps as I got them out of the prison. Over a year, I ended up making over 292 of these. And you can see them all compiled here. And so in addition to kind of complicating this notion of who we view as an offender, it's also capturing this way of kind of marking time. And so through the use of repetition, you can get a sense of the scale of mass incarceration as well. And for the exhibition at the Met, we actually paired this work with another image or another installation of works from Alfonso Bertian, who developed the mugshot. And it was a poignant way to kind of capture how the development of the mugshot has always been weaponized as an instrument of control. And so I thought it was really interesting to kind of recontextualize that within a contemporary conversation where the people who were originally in those mugshots were all considered anarchists, and they would have been potentially enemies of the state. And so they used the photography as a way to kind of capture people who opposed the government. And so fast forward a little bit. After a year in solitary, it was time for me to be sentenced. And we argued the drug weights. I ended up getting found guilty of 500 grams of cocaine instead of the 50 kilos, which never existed. And for that, they sentenced me to 6 years in federal prison. And so I went into the federal prison system, into general population, where I had slightly more access to different materials, including bed sheets and colored pencils. And I could now order hair gel from commissary. And so I began thinking about, again, very intentionally using the materials of the prison against itself as a way to make works that not only are talking about the carceral system, but are actually made of its fabric. And so I began transferring images out of the New York Times onto the surface of prison bed sheets using hair gel and a spoon. And it would basically leave the inverse image, and I would come back and blend all those images together with colored pencils as a way to create these kind of surrealist landscapes. And so again, over time, you can kind of see my work is often very large and monumental, but it's made in like a 6x9 foot cell. And so for me, this was not only a way to kind of sustain my sanity, but it was also an act of resistance. It was a way to capture everything that was happening in the world as it's kind of filtered through the carceral system. And what that revealed to me was really interesting. And I say that because we're all trained to read and write from a very young age. It's baked into our educational system. And so most people can read an article, come to some kind of critical understanding, and make a determination one way or another of what you take away from that article. But most people in society are not trained how to read visual language. It's just not as invested in our educational system. And I would argue that visual language is as equally impactful as the written text. And so there's a bit of a rupture here that's happening where it's like when you read an article and you come to a critical understanding and you see an image, but you don't necessarily know what that image is telling you, but you feel it, it still has the same impact on you, but it's subtle and it's hard to decipher because you haven't been trained, or most people haven't been trained, how to read visual language. And so what's interesting is when I removed all of the images from their textual narratives, you're just left with a visual representation of pretty much everything that appeared in the New York Times from 2010 to 2013. And so when you look at this as kind of a time capsule or a snapshot of the world through this mediated outlet, you can kind of see what takes precedent. By far the largest image, and scale is the most biggest signifier of what we value. And so the largest image you see are commercial advertisements, often depicting a skinny white woman standing in some kind of configuration. But there's no displays of diversity, either in race or body shape or anything. It's all this kind of singular way of viewing beauty as a way to sell products, which takes precedence over everything else, like depictions of war and famine and natural disasters. And so like you can get a sense of what we value as a society, or what's being at least portrayed through the media of what we should value as a society. And this ends up setting societal norms. And so when you think about who's being viewed as valuable, it's being depicted to you visually, even if the textual narrative says something completely different. The visuals are telling you something else. And it also depicts what we deem disposable in terms of people, in terms of countries, in terms of belief systems, because those images are depicted very small. They're not given near the level of prominence as commercial advertisements. And so for me, this was a way to kind of capture the broader systems that feed into the mass disappearance of people and the carceral state, where purgatory was more about capturing the humanity of people who are ensnared in this system. This is a broader snapshot of the thing that feeds it. And to kind of pull all of this together for the exhibition, it was also the 10-year marker from the time that I had been released. And I wanted to create a work that brought, like as a viewer moved through the space, I wanted to create a work that brought these ideas to kind of more of a culmination. And so I created a new work called Naxos. And for Naxos, I asked people who are currently incarcerated if they could go out into the prison yard and select an ideal pebble and mail it to me. And that was pretty much the only direction that I gave them. And so I hired incarcerated project managers, I paid them and found participants. Everyone who participated, I also paid. And so this was a way for me to leverage fellowships and grants and also provide money and access and support back into the carceral system, but also a way for them to have complete autonomy in how they're represented in this abstracted form of the ideal pebble. And that comes back to this quote from Carl Jung, which basically says that you can go out into the riverbed, collect all of the pebbles, weigh them, and find the average weight, but that if you go back out into the riverbed, you may never find a pebble that weighs that average weight. And I thought that was a beautiful encapsulation of how when we create systems, it ignores individuality, it ignores uniqueness, and it creates the ways that we can then ignore supporting people holistically because we're bought into a broader system. And so it was important for me to kind of pull this back. And this piece is made up of over 10,000 pebbles that were sent to me by people across the country. You get a sense of the scale, again, of incarceration, and they're all suspended on this white wall. And it's very hard to see in this image, but every single thread that is suspends a pebble has the image transfer of Apocalyptine, the work across from it, on the surface of its thread. And so it becomes a very minimalist, kind of deconstructed Apocalyptine that is no longer talking about this broader system, but talking about the individual.
Wow.
And as you can imagine, this piece took a very, very long time to make. And this brings me to the other thing I just wanted to kind of touch on very briefly, and that is the importance of not just supporting artists, but supporting artists who have been through the carceral system. And so in 2017, I founded the Center for Art and Advocacy, which funds and supports directly impacted artists across the country. We were the first organization to be built that does that is dedicated to funding and mentoring and supporting artists. And so since then, we've funded over 42 artists. Some of them, after receiving our initial funding, have gone on to get MacArthur Genius Awards, Pulitzer Prizes, prestigious shows at museums and galleries across the country. And we are often the very first funder of these artists. And so it just goes to show you how transformative some access to mentorship and community and connection really is for artists when you think about it. In some cases, for over 4 decades, have had no access to community because they've been behind bars. And so for me, my work is kind of twofold. It's about making art objects that connect to my personal experience that also highlight the broader impacts of incarceration. And in addition to that, and trying to like change people's narratives and views and get people to connect and feel an emotional connection to these issues, which are often rather ignored by most people. But in addition to that, I'm creating a different system and structure that is supportive, one that doesn't rely on punitive ideology, and one that creates opportunities, and it's been wildly successful. And since we've opened in 2016 and funded all of these artists, not a single one of them has reoffended or gone back to prison. And that's not even something that we set out to do. That just happened because we're investing in individuals as people. We're asking, what are you good at? What do you want to learn? Who do you need to be connected to? And we're working in ways that they want us to work. We're not trying to conform them into something other than what they want to do. And I think that's, again, a testament to treating people as full human beings without looking at them through some stereotypical lens as less than. And so we've been doing the fellowships for the past 6 years. We've also opened a gallery space in Brooklyn, so we now have a permanent space to showcase their work. And we are working to build an artist residency program in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, to provide time and space for them to explore new materials and new mediums. And additionally, we're building an academy program where we partner with museums and institutions across the country where they can take on the curriculum, utilize our network of artists to be facilitators and mentors, and then work in proximity to your own local communities and utilize this as a kind of blueprint for creating supportive systems. And in closing, this is just a beautiful picture of the amazing community of artists that we've supported. They've all come out to the exhibition, and you can just see that when you create a different system, one that is not based on carceral logic or punitive ideology, people will thrive, people will be very successful, and they will form their own communities and connections in ways that are quite profound and transformative.
That was great. Thanks. Okay, great. Thank you so much. I wish you could see this in person, as I had a chance to do 6 or 7 times, it really moved me. And I want to emphasize the word moved and come back to that in just a second. How remarkable a piece of work must be to do what this piece did to me. This was back in 2016. It was on exhibition at the Pearlstein Gallery at Drexel University, just a few blocks from here, where Jesse had a one-person show, which was really wonderful. And I was captivated by this piece. I went back and back and back again to it to try to understand it, and also to think about how I was looking at it and whether it was appropriate, whether it was narcissistic. And I want to just talk that through with you as a way maybe of having us all together consider what are we doing when we're looking. Let me start it this way. I had 3 ideas or questions that were in me, not that I got from Jesse, they were in me, but they had somehow been repressed, not because I intentionally thought they weren't important. I think it's because maybe they were too hard to think about. And this work brought them to the fore for me in an exciting and disturbing way. And eventually, after my continued engagement with this piece and my writing about this piece, I understood the ways in which these 3 ideas were I was going to say profound, but that sounds like I'm trying to say something about myself, which I'm not trying to say. That they were important, they were significant, and they needed to be used as ways of thinking about the world that we're in now. And I thought I'd just mention the 3. The first is, is there another slide of mine here? The first was on my 3rd visit to this piece. I just finished reading something that Jamaica Kincaid wrote, which I think is really true. Can you take a look at it for a minute? You know, for the technology that we've got in today's classroom, we have to accept Aristotle's understanding of contradiction. It's either up or it's down. It's black or it's white. It's a 1 or a 0, right? And that's useful. But in terms of like social life and our experience of ourselves as bodies and our experience of the political body, this is also true. I'm not trying to reject Aristotle here, but this also seems true to me. And it signals the idea that if you're experiencing something as waste or as trash or as deformed or as useless, this tells us that there may be life there. There may be life there. And this confirmation occurred to me because of Jesse's work, because these tires, and we'll have Jesse talk about the installation in a minute, but these tires, if you sit there long enough, and for some reason I was called to do that, they move. And I thought I was like on a drug or hallucinating. It's not just the movement that happens when you hang something and, you know, what's that called? Pendulum. It's not just that effect. It's internally, it's moving and it's wrinkling over time. And God, am I going crazy? So you know what I did? I went to the building. It's over here at 33rd and Walnut. It's like the study for the structure of atoms or something. It's got the coolest name of any building at Penn. And I went in there and I went from office to office to office to find somebody who understood the chemistry of rubber. And I found a PhD student from China who is doing a dissertation on rubber. Yes. it moves. It's going to continue to move. It does, because of its chemical composition, it is moving. You can't make it still. It will always move. So the second idea, which you'll now be able to see the connections between the two. I couldn't see the connections before I experienced Jesse's piece, is that at least so far in human history, domination has never been total. Domination has never been total. There's always been resistance. On the slave ships coming over in the transatlantic slave trade, we've got evidence of resistance. And during the show of the Holocaust, we've got evidence of Jewish prisoners writing Bible passages or poetry on the wall. We've got all these forms of resistance when met with domination. Now, Orwell and Huxley and others have tried to conceptualize a moment in which resistance, even in the mind, may no longer be possible. And that's depressing. But at least historically so far, there's never been domination without resistance. So that's the second idea. And this poem, let me just, I'll read the first paragraph of something I wrote about it, of this piece. Oh, I thought I was, but I don't seem to have it, which is okay. This piece evoked for me Billie Holiday's great song, Strange Fruit. I'm sure a number of you know this song about strange fruit being the black bodies hanging from trees during lynching. And it was evoked when I saw this. Now, some of it's because of where I grew up in the South, in Atlanta, in the shadow of Stone Mountain. Do you all know this? There's a huge carving that's bigger than this room on the side of the mountain of Robert E. Lee, Jeb Stuart, and Stonewall Jackson. The carving is so big that the KKK, Ku Klux Klan, used to, with pulleys, pull down tables and picnic baskets and eat on Stonewall Jackson's arm on the side of the mountain, okay? So this is a monument that's not been erased or taken down. It's still there. And because of that particular history, but also the resistance to that history expressed in jazz, my parents were really into that music. And until I was 7 or 8, I thought Dizzy Gillespie was my uncle. He was at the house so often. Because of me being around people who I thought of as dukes and counts and presidents, for those of you that know jazz, you know who I'm talking about. But then also being in this sea where lynching was, you know, a practice, that it's almost as if I couldn't help but think about Billie Holiday and Meeropol, who wrote the song, when I saw this and understood that it was swaying. So I guess the third idea that came together out of this is also a disturbing one. In its most recent form, it's come from René Girard, a French theorist, passed away several years ago. His study of myth and of history throughout time, across civilizations, demonstrated to him that community, which we think of as kind of a word that we seek, it's something that we seek, a practice that we seek, that community is always created by scapegoating. And that, geez, if you think about histories of nationalism, when you were in high school and the cliques that formed, just from the mundane to the you know, the supra historical, that community is always being formed by othering, by scapegoating. And it's something that, of course, if you're on the left, like Martin Luther King, for instance, this with his idea of beloved community, that's a kind of critique of this practice of creating community through scapegoating. And so this dream that he has of creating a beloved community is one where we don't do that. But my God, that's hard to do. And even at a place like Penn, I mean, when I was first here in law school at Penn back in the 70s, many of the people that are providing services at Penn were full-time employees with benefits, right? Now they're part-timers or they're independent contractors with lower wages. Their hours are managed so that they're permanently temporary, right? And so even at a place like Penn, where we think of the Penn community, right? Even at a place like Penn, this kind of scapegoating happens. So we've got a lot of work to do, and it's I think Jesse has like a profound understanding of these ideas, even though they may not have been conscious in his mind. And I think this is not just for Jesse, but for any of us who do creative work. It's the magical thing that Susan talked about from her courses, I think. This idea that we can somehow find what we need in a work of art that the artists themselves may not have been consciously trying to articulate, or may have been trying to articulate but didn't fully realize their intentions, right? And through some of the wonderful dialogue I've been able to have with Jesse through his work and also directly with him, I've really been enriched. So I want to thank you so much for that. And I've got a present for you tonight. When I rolled it down the aisle here and almost knocked Miranda over, Jesse immediately knew what it was because he knows how much I love this piece. In fact, I love this piece so much, I can't immerse myself in any more of his work, which is weird, right? But it's been such an overwhelming experience for me. I'm exhausted, like wonderfully exhausted, right? I need some time off before I engage other pieces. So I brought a knife. Let's open it up and see what it looks like. Come on, you want to do it? You know what it is, right?
They wouldn't let me have one of these at prison, by the way.
Oh. This is a lot wider than the tire on my car, and probably yours as well. And maybe this is a good year, right? Maybe Jesse will talk about it a little bit. But what I imagined as the beginning moment of this piece was that there were piles of these by the racetrack, dumped, and that you saw them all the time.
Yeah, I grew up around them.
And that they're dumped and eventually carted off and eventually end up in 2 or 3 dumps in the Middle East, which can be seen by satellites because they're so huge. It's sort of like the graveyard of tires. But for some reason, you picked a few up with this discarded material and brought something incredibly to life here. And I was hoping you could say a few words about it. I was praying you weren't going to already use this slide in your presentation. So that worked out great because we didn't plan this.
No, I was going to say it's hard to condense 10 years,
Yeah.
10 plus years worth of work into a presentation. But yeah, so the piece that Andy is referring to is a work that I made. It was within the first year that I came home from prison. And I was going to my grandparents' house, and a little background, my grandparents raced sprint cars. My uncle would drive, my grandfather used to race back in the day. And for those of you who don't know what it is, it's like dirt track racing. It's they go very fast around this like small oval dirt track. They have to put wings on top of them because if they didn't, they go so fast that they would literally fly off the ground. But they're like sliding at intense speeds around this circular track. And you can only utilize the tires for one race. So you buy all 4 tires, you get to race once with them, and then you have to discard them. And one, it always struck me as such a waste. But 2, the thing that I actually responded to the most with this was the way that they would groove the markings by hand in tires. So there was such like care that went into how deeply they grooved the tires, how many grooves they made in the tires according to the conditions of the track, whether it was wet, whether it was dry, how they expected the track to dry over the race. And so there was a lot of like creative mark making that was going into this, which also kind of, for me, mimicked like an architecture of incarceration. They were almost like cell structures. And so, again, I didn't quite know what necessarily I was trying to say or do with these, but it was a very intuitive way of recognizing that I was responding to this material. And I didn't quite know what it meant or what I was trying to do, but I just knew that I needed to do something with it. And so I would collect these tires then, and I would stab the knife kind of on the edge and cut off the front.
No.
I don't know that I have the
No.
energy for that. Cut off the front facing of the tires and the back, and then cut the strip. And it would basically release it from its form, right? Like this is a structured form that allowed it to function in a very specific way. And by cutting off the pieces that are holding the structure and releasing that felt like, I don't know, some act of liberation. But it was also for me capturing, again, this essence of time, like racing around in circles, trying to go as fast as you possibly can in a circle, same thing over and over and over and over. And it's like, for what?
Yeah.
Like, what are they doing? I don't understand why they're doing this. But for me, it just captured all sorts of connotations of the carceral system and how when you're inside, time stops being linear and it starts being cyclical. It's the same thing day after day, the same people, the same space. You never leave this tiny little area other than through a creative practice or a creative thought process. And so for me, that's what was kind of happening with this work and how I was viewing it. And also, once they were released, I was viewing them as bodies. Like they represented like a skin of this process, of this race around a track or around life that we're all doing. And it became this kind of remnant of that race that also became symbolic of us as people moving through life. And so I suspended them in the installation with meat hooks as a way to kind of capture that bodily presence and how they were then liberated.
Yeah. Wow. So can you give me a sense of how you look at other artists' work? I mean, I was giving you a story about like how I looked at your work, right? And what it awoke in me. And I'm wondering, when you look at other artists' work, whether it's, you know, in the street or at a museum, wherever, what are you doing as you approach it? I mean, I'm wondering, like, you know, if we're totally open, it feels like to me we're putting ourselves in the position where we are, Paulo Freire would call it the banking model of education. You know, the professor has all the capital and the students are impoverished. And what the professor does is puts the information in their head. even the imagery is like sexually violent in some ways, if you think about it, right? And so Paulo Freire critiqued this idea that you have to, there's some kind of meeting that takes place with the student or the viewer of the art being able to acknowledge their own needs and their own commitments while engaging, right? The process might not ever be perfectly horizontal, but it's really different than that banking model. And so I struggle always when I'm approaching work to think about my openness, right, to new experience, to an aesthetic experience, but also like wanting to hold on to my own commitments as I'm dealing with it, and maybe even asking or challenging the work to help me. So how do you handle this?
I think it is always that push and pull. It's the balancing of those things for me as well, where I think like everyone, when we go into viewing an object or an image in the media, it doesn't matter what it is, any visual thing that we encounter, I think we all bring our own kind of latent baggage, conceptions, experiences, all of the ways, all of the things that formed us internally influence how we see and how we understand and digest information. And so I think it's almost impossible to not do that.
Yeah.
And so the way that I go to museums or experience artworks is that I try to keep myself open to possibilities. And I like to allow things that really kind of hit me and connect with me to connect. And then that is the moment where it's like, okay, well, why is this connecting with me? Because I just walked by 10 other things that had no impact on me.
Right.
Which can also be equally valuable. So you can think of those things and be like, okay, well, why am I not responding to these things?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's always just a way of kind of making sense of what we're seeing and experiencing through our own lens, and being open enough to allowing that to like change our perspectives one way or another, or reaffirm our perspectives. And so it's always that push-pull that I think I'm working through. And I never read wall text when I go. I probably shouldn't say that. But like when I'm viewing, I like walking in, I like experiencing the works. And when I respond to something, then I go back and I read the wall text, because I try to figure it out on my own and like why I'm personally responding to it before I get any information from the artist or the curator or from an outside perspective, because I like to have my own solid sense of what I'm responding to versus someone telling me what to respond to.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you something about the Center for Art and Advocacy. And in my mind, I was playing with, so how different it would be if it was the Center for Art as Advocacy. And I wanted to talk maybe a little bit about the difference that would flow out of that other title versus the one that you picked. And it feels appropriate to do it because clearly you're committed to creating an aesthetic experience. And you're also involved in things that are, we could label as directly advocacy, even if they have a kind of connection back to artistic practice, right? But my sense is, and tell me if I'm thinking about this correctly or in the way that you do, that there's actually that you're intentionally not doing, this is going to be difficult to say, you're intentionally not doing art as political practice. but your art is embodies political significance. So in other words, I'm trying to make a distinction between like the plane of aesthetics and the plane of political advocacy, while maintaining a third point that aesthetics is political.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if you could react to that or reconceptualize it for me.
I think that's accurate, because for me, and I think for many artists, the political kind of importance and the advocacy in many ways is baked into the artists that we work with. It's already built into them as individuals. So they're already politicized. And from my perspective, one of the most powerful ways that we can help create more of a community, like a real community, one that is not built by othering,
Yeah.
but one that is built
Yeah.
by actually inviting in, is creating actual empathy, or spaces for empathy to exist and for people to experience the experiences of others, which I think is quite radical in our society, which is so built upon individualism, exceptionalism, and like people are not encouraged to feel or think about other people's experiences, only their own. And for me, the power of artwork is that bridge. And so we partner our artists with advocates who are doing direct advocacy work. And in doing that, I think our artists are able to take often very complex, very kind of convoluted issues that can be, you know, depicted through an academic journal or a, you know, statistics and numbers, and we can tell you how many people are incarcerated and of what race and of what income levels, and we can tell you all of the information and write it in compelling ways. But what art does is it distills that into something that feels not just true, but it's a distillation of emotion and connection and feeling. And so you can hear 2 million people are incarcerated, but you don't feel it. And so an artwork, whether that's visual or a film or a poetry reading, it doesn't matter what it is, it creates the space for you to be able to feel and step inside someone else's shoes, or understand or recontextualize how you think and your own experiences. And so for me, that is the way that we try to utilize aesthetics to bring people into these very often dark and brutal conversations that most people never want to enter into. They'd rather just ignore it. It's why we build prisons in the first place. That is a wall that is being built to disappear people that we don't want to have to think about. And the inverse of that is museums, right? Those are institutions that are being built, and we put things in there that we want people to think about. This is what's important. This is what really matters. This is culture. This is history. And so for me, it's the perfect way to bridge those bookends. How do you take an artist who has been through some of the most punitive, destructive systems that this country has to offer and elevate them to a position that says you are valuable? And that act alone to me is political, and that is advocacy.
Yeah. So what would be an example of something that like crossed the line? It was a piece of art that was being made that was intended to be art in the way that you're talking about it. It would have a kind of, it could have a political consequence in the world, but it's not itself political advocacy. It's what we're calling art in the way that we're understanding it. but that would cross the line over and not be art. You know, I mean, it feels like in some settings since the 60s in particular that I'm thinking about, where the political advocacy was intended as an art project. And I think what we're saying, which may be controversial, is that when it crosses over into being like didactic and teaching a particular kind of message, that it's no longer art. When I'm using this piece again and again and again as this well that's nourishing me, when I look to it for answers, that's not art, and I'm canceling the aesthetic experience that I was drawn to. Is there a kind of art with someone who had a critique of the carceral system would be making that wouldn't meet our definition and would be pure political activism?
I think yes. But again, I mean, I think it's a different form of activism. And so it can still be, I think, a creative practice that is making this impact. But I think it's just a different way of approaching how to make impact.
Yeah.
And so one is not more, in my opinion, more valuable than the other.
Yeah, they're different. Yeah.
Right. And I think that for me, it's the subtlety. It's the openness. It's not I think when works get cross over into telling people what to think, telling people what to believe, I think you lose the opportunity for people to actually come into a work and engage with it.
Yeah.
Because then it's no different than just being like, you're wrong, it's this.
Yeah.
And so I think like that openness, that subtlety, that nuance is the space that needs to exist, because everyone has different experiences. And so how do you allow people to enter into a space that their experiences are equally valid, but are challenged?
Yeah.
Versus being kind of didactic and
Yes, I was thinking about your reflections on particularly in the federal facility, the artistic practice that you engaged in, not only making art but also teaching art. And I'm assuming that you're, aside obviously from your critiques of the institution in general and of that facility in particular, I'm assuming that you help to like co-create a kind of co-producing space there that really had value, despite the critique, of the institution in which it was embedded. And I'm wondering whether, number one, that piece of it you miss under a theory that it's difficult to generate the kind of creativity that comes from constraint in the situation that you now find yourself in. And I'm wondering if it's, so let's just do that first. I mean, that experience itself of being oppressed and dominated, but nonetheless figuring out a way in the spaces that weren't as complicated to co-create and as a part of a community. Yeah. So how do you think back about that?
I mean, I think in a lot of ways there's something very freeing about being constrained. Where, when you take away all of the options of materials or paint or whatever it is that you can choose, and you're like, you only have these three things, what are you going to do with these three things?
Right.
There's a freedom in that because it opens up infinite possibilities of how to work with a very limited set of things. And so I think what was powerful about doing that work on the inside, not just through my own practice, but also teaching other people who are inside how to think like that, how to think expansively around something so minimal. And it wasn't just doing the art practice and teaching them techniques and those skills. It was really thinking about how to teach them to liberate themselves, to think critically. And so for like one class, I had someone just take an apple, and I was like, I want you to write everything that this apple symbolizes. And they're like, what do you mean it's an apple? And I'm like, it's not just an apple. I was like, it's red, it's round, it's soft, it will decay, it represents a city, it has seeds in it, it can grow, I was like, I want you to write a paragraph or a couple paragraphs about what this apple symbolizes to you. And I think like that small act was just kind of revolutionary for a lot of people because a lot of people haven't been challenged.
Yeah.
Because the system has been set up in such a way that we don't teach people how to think critically, particularly around visual language. And I say all of that because it's like when I came home, in a lot of ways, it's kind of the same thing out here. So all of the forces and techniques of control and confinement and the panopticon and surveillance and how our behaviors are monitored and controlled forms a set of restrictions out here as well. And so, working with people out here in many ways is the same thing, where it's like teaching people how to think critically about whatever their current experience is to create something very expansive, which often leads then to creating community because it creates connection and like-minded individuals and ways of thinking and seeing and sharing. And it starts to build that connective tissue and that network, or no, I wouldn't say network, it's a community. Because a community is something that you choose to buy into, where a network is something that you can just opt out of.
Yeah.
Like I can unfriend you tomorrow because you're part of my social network, right? But like a community, it's messy, it's gritty, you opt in, you work. And so for me, I think that it's very similar in a lot of ways as being inside in confined spaces as to being outside and confined in different ways.
Yeah.
So, gentlemen,
I've been at Penn teaching for like 35 years now, and I've come to this idea that it's easier to say than to pull off, but the idea is basically that I think of myself as at Penn, but not of Penn. Because I don't want to be of Penn. And often the sort of public image of the artist is the the loner who has escaped institutional life. But so much of artistic practice is bound up with institutions, right? And so I'm wondering, how do you think about yourself in relation to the institutions of the art world?
Yeah, I think it's the way that I view my practice is being realistic and working with the systems that exist. And so one of the ways to gain visibility, to gain attention for the issues that I care about, the people that I care about, is to integrate myself into these systems to gain visibility, to gain some kind of prominence and validation, so that I'm able to speak about something that is actually quite meaningful. And so I think it's important to work with existing institutions in that way. And as a practicing artist, to actually be strategic in how you do that and how you approach that. While at the same time, I'm trying to also build a separate institution,
Right.
a different institution, one that is not kind of built on gatekeeping and privilege and limited access, one that is built on actual community, investing in people who are the most disadvantaged in many ways. Because again, I mean, for me, there are some just serious lessons that we can learn from people who have been through the carceral system. I mean, incarceration is not just a singular issue. It is literally the epicenter where every social crisis in this country is filtered and managed. So whether you're thinking about climate change or women's rights or immigration or any other range of societal issues, they're all being punished through the criminal justice system. It is the main tool that we have in this country to manage and filter people and issues that we want to control or disappear. And for me, how do we create institutions and systems that are in direct opposition to that? How do we create ones that are built on visibility and care and humanity and shared experience and shared culture that is not the individualistic survival that I think most people do throughout their day-to-day lives? It's like, as long as I'm doing okay, great. Fuck everybody else.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, it's a mindset that is so kind of just antithetical to who we are as human beings. And it actually does more harm to you than it does to other people, whether you realize it or not.
Yeah.
And like, so for me, I'm thinking about like, how do we create those systems? For example, one of our artists, Gary Tyler, who's a phenomenal human being, he spent 42 years on death row in Angola prison from the age of 16. And he was wrongfully incarcerated for the murder of a young white kid in Louisiana. And he not only went through the most oppressive system that this country has to offer in one of the worst prisons that exists on the planet, in a former plantation, but he not only found ways to survive, he thrived. He found creative practice. He built community. He worked in the hospice program because so many of them were lifers. He made quilts with their portraits on it as mementos to give them as they were dying.
Amazing. Yeah.
And he came home after 42 years, and he is the loveliest, most empathetic, kind human being that you would ever meet. And I say that because he endured some of the worst things that we could possibly imagine for 42 years, over 4 decades. And so I think there are really deep lessons in his experience. And he's not the exception either. There are so many people who have been through these experiences. And so when you start to think about that and equate that with what we're going through now, where we're going through 4 years, hopefully, of a very authoritarian and oppressive regime, I think that the people who have gone through that system and the ways that they managed to build community, they didn't wait for permission. They became innovative and creative and found ways, again, not to survive, but to thrive. I just think there's a real power in that I'm trying to build an institution that helps to amplify and elevate and pull that out so that people can provide those lessons out in the world.
Yeah.
So
Amen.
I'm going to jump in here.
Yeah, you better,
So that-
because like this could,
Well, yes, and I get that sense.
You better.
So this is such a wonderful conversation. I want to welcome the audience to it with questions for both or either of you. We've got about 10 or 15 minutes. If they're come around this way. Oh, no, it's okay. I'm coming to you.
This was great. So my question is for Jesse. I have two questions and hopefully I'm not hogging. I'm really curious if your name, Jesse Krimes, is it a pseudonym or a pen name? I know it sounds corny, but yeah, I would love to know that. And secondly, the placement of your artwork and looking at some of the photos are always suspended and hung up. Particularly the one with the stones. Why is that the case? Like, it's so structural, and I don't know, you're talking about the carceral system and how much it's impacted you. So I wonder why that's the case. Thanks.
Yeah, so first part, I was born with that name, so it was some cruel universal joke, I think. Because moving through the prison system, I've heard pretty much every terrible joke you could hear about my name. And like also everyone else in prison gets a cool prison nickname.
Yeah,
Like everyone gets something that's not
Yeah.
their name.
right.
They just all called me Krimes.
Yeah,
because
you already had one. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great.
I really wanted something else.
Uh,
So that's my actual government name. And then I think so much of the hanging and suspension of works for me, I think, is a way to capture the weight of the scale of what is happening, right? I want people to feel just how immense this system is and how it's impacting just broad swaths of the community. And so I think the suspension, often using stones or even of the rubber, is a way to provide that feeling to a viewer who experiences the work.
Thank you both. This has been really great. Just a question I had is, in the context of the victim of a crime, either through the artists that you've supported, through your own artwork, has there been relationship between the victim of a crime and seeing the work from a perpetrator? Has it been that direct? Has it been more broader about yeah, I'm just curious what if that conversation has been had in any direct way, because of course indirectly, of course it has, because this speaks very much to a restorative justice practice of the self, but it might not necessarily include the other person who suffered.
Right.
So just would be curious. Thank you.
It's a great question. And so personally, or in my experience, I haven't had the interaction with someone who has been directly affected by any of our fellows or myself in that capacity. But the thing that I would say is that most of the people who end up in the carceral system are themselves also victims of crimes. And so we're talking about a population of people who are both victimized and then also victimizing other people. And so basically harm is producing harm. And I think, it's really important that we actually think about restorative justice practices, because it is the only way that I think both people are allowed to heal. Because even in a punitive system where someone does something horrendous, right? And maybe someone else is no longer around. Like someone's taken someone's life, but the family members of that individual are still around, and the pain of that is still around. But I firmly believe that holding on to that pain, that not processing that pain, and then perpetrating further violence because of that pain upon other people, even if that is the person who perpetrated it, is actually the thing that harms that person, the victim, even further. And so there's ways that we can create an environment where it's less about the punitive way of addressing violence or crime or poverty, but how do we do it in a restorative practice way? And I just think that that's really important as we try to build a society that is not based upon punishment. And I say that because any person who has done anything is not the same person they were when they were 20 and now they're 30, 50, 80 years old. People change. And I think that that's something that just has to be taken into account. Because again, if you have a child and that child does something wrong, you don't take your child and lock them in the basement and chain them down there and feed them food that's produced not for humans, right? You take your child and you want to teach them accountability, why what they did was wrong, even if it harmed you or it harmed property or it harmed anything else. But it's about accountability. It's not about punishment, because you want your child to then be a better human being in the world. And you don't do that through punitive practice. And you do that through taking accountability. And so for me, as a society, it makes all of us more safe if we can get past our own individual pains and experiences and actually grow as individuals and give grace to others. Again, with accountability.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like this isn't something that's just freely given. It's something that is earned.
Thank you. I just want to point something out, and I don't know if you know about it, but currently in New York and in London, there is a play called Punch, and it is exactly about restorative justice. It is about a young man who killed another young man, and how his parents eventually they met, and it's quite something. So I very much recommend it. It's called Punch.
Mhm.
Hi, I wanted to start by saying thank you both and everyone involved. This has been really incredible. And Jesse, I'm a tremendously huge fan of your work. I think it's fantastic and I think it's really important. I myself am a student at Penn. I'm a first generation low income senior now. I'm majoring in fine art. So my question was, sort of how did you go from being somebody that created art to someone who had art as a career? Like, how did that happen practically? And I suppose also internally, working through that transition.
Yeah, so I think first things first is that I realized that being an artist is not a choice for me. It's something that I need to do. It's so core to who I am. And so I think as an artist, we make the work that we want to make. And I think it's important to trust your intuition, trust your feelings. And I know it's probably hard when you're in an MFA program and everyone's trying to destroy your feelings. Because that's their job though, because it's, you know, it's how do you break down and challenge and basically force you to stand on what you believe in. But I think that's really important. It's like, as an artist, to not get lost in trends or, oh, abstraction's really big right now, I'm going to start painting abstract, if what you want to paint is representational. And I think first and foremost, that's the most important thing as an artist, is do the work that you believe in, that you actually feel and connect with. Secondly, then you find, or what I did is I found how to take the work that I wanted to make and do little twists and tweaks that then fit it within a commercial setting, right? Because the understanding that the commercial gallery setting is very different from a museum and institutional setting. But as an artist, you need to find ways to support your practice. And for me, I'm choosing the commercial route. And so I've figured out ways to stay true to my practice, to the work conceptually that I want to make, that I find meaningful, but also maybe I make it a little more colorful than I would have. Because the color, to me, is just an aesthetic kind of trope that I can utilize to engage audiences or make it attractive. But like the conceptual underpinnings within the work are still baked into that work, whether it's like a bright yellow that everyone feels warm about, or it's a black that it like makes everyone kind of step back from. And so it's staying true to your practice, but also understanding that there has to be some flexibility in how you present it to the world in ways that people will respond to, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We've been talking a lot about your work after incarceration, and you started presenting yourself as a young man who the system failed you, basically. And it's wonderful what you're doing now with adults post incarceration. But I wonder if you would find more effective to work with young people who, in order to save them years of pain and cruelty, to develop a visual language so that they can avoid going through what you went through.
It's actually something, I mean, I've thought a lot about this, and the thing that I've seen when I came home from prison is that there was a gap in the systems that were pre-existing. And that was, there was no programs offering support to adults after they come home. Yeah. When I look at the kind of national landscape, there are a plethora of organizations that are working with young kids who are directly impacted by incarceration, whether they're having encounters with law enforcement themselves or have parents who are incarcerated. Yeah. There are a number of organizations pretty much in every city across the country doing that work. And so for me, I didn't want to step into that directly and try to recreate the wheel. And then I began kind of thinking of it as, well, thinking about kids who are being impacted by incarceration, they're often kids who have parents who are currently incarcerated. Yeah. Right? There's often already a deterioration of the family, taking people out of the community, putting them in the carceral system that then creates the problems and spaces for kids to fall into the same traps themselves. And so it feels equally important to me that we focus on older adults, often men. The carceral system is 90% men. And so how do we actually build the systems and support networks for them to heal? And that's part of what we're doing at the residency. It's not just for creative practice. We're actually making it like a mental health and wellness residency as well. And so they come there, they're in nature, they have peaceful surroundings. We're going to have mental health professionals there, therapists, different modalities of wellness that they can kind of choose to engage in. But the idea is that if we actually heal some of the adults, that then they can become credible mentors and messengers to work with kids through these other programs. And when I look out at the landscape of what's the services that are being provided, I haven't seen anything that is focused on helping the adults kind of heal, at least through a creative artistic practice. And so it feels important to do that work, which I think will then feed into helping younger kids who are experiencing the negative effects of incarceration as well.
Yeah.
No. No, it's a very complex system of things that are happening. And so it's like, I just always try to think strategically of like, how can I be most effective and useful from my personal standpoint? And so I think that's how I view it.
Well, I want to thank you both. I want to thank you, especially Jesse, for sharing your work and your story with us, and Andy for sharing the way that it has affected you. This has been a really meaningful program for me, and I hope everyone who came out tonight enjoyed it. Again, I encourage you to come back to the Arthur Ross Gallery over homecoming weekend. We will have the opening of our next exhibition, which is called Postigo Express, which focuses on photography in Basque Country just after the end of the Franco era. It's a pretty heavy show. It deals with a lot of ETA bombings and violence, but also how does daily life come to accommodate tragedy over and over again, and then ultimately emerge from an era. So that opens on November 7th. We hope to see you then. If you're an alum, we hope that you go to the Alumni Award of Merit Gala at which Susan will be celebrated. So join me in thanking Jesse and Andy.
I was tired.
I don't know why.
I appreciate it. Photos alone. It is.
Thank you so much. You don't want to like break the
Yes.
Okay. Well, maybe they, you know what? Maybe they have theirs or something.
Yes. I mean, that's what I'm referring to.